Hey everybody, so I just got back from seeing a double feature of sorts. We're going to talk about the first one I just saw, and then in a separate video we're going to talk about the separate film I saw. So the first one was the latest installment in the Tom and Jerry franchise called Tom and Jerry the Movie. Not to be confused if you grew up in the 90s with the Tom and Jerry movie. This is Tom and Jerry the Movie. So yeah, big distinction. So, if you're wondering what I thought of Tom and Jerry, I'm wearing a shirt that's actually a little too small for me, but I figured I'd show you a bit of a visual interest. So, I consider myself a fan of Tom and Jerry. I grew up with the shorts would show on Cartoon Retro a fair amount. I did see the original Tom and Jerry movie not when it first came out. Geez, I saw it a couple of times, and I'd see those weird crossover movies that they kind of do. You know, like Tom and Jerry Meet the Wizard of Oz, or more recently Tom and Jerry and Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. That's a lot of "ands" in a title. But I love Tom and Jerry. I think they're a lot of fun. They have great personalities. The animation was very fine and well timed. The expressions great. The sound effects, everything about them is just comedic genius, in my opinion. They're one of the greatest comedic duos, one of the greatest comedic anything of all time, in my opinion. I love them. Really, everybody loves them. Huge fans of comedy love them. So yeah, Tom and Jerry is great. But as far as their movies have gone, I want to say they've had ups and downs, but they've never really had an up, so to speak. They've always kind of been down slash just more lower level. The original Tom and Jerry movie, for example, made the very fatal mistake, in my opinion, of having them talk. Now, Tom and Jerry were not really talking characters in the original show. There were once in a while where they would do a sound effect, like they would say a couple words, like Tom would say, "I love you." You know, once in a while when he thought someone was someone else. It was for a joke. They're not inherently talking characters, though. But in addition to that, the movie really suffered from the fact that, one, they didn't put the focus on Tom and Jerry. The focus was really more on this girl trying to find her father, and the slapstick wasn't very well done. There were about a million plot points going on. It wasn't a good movie. And the crossover movies, including some really weird ones like Tom and Jerry Go to Mars, were definitely strange, but they never really felt quite like Tom and Jerry. They always felt like they didn't really belong in this world. So now we've got this new movie, this is a movie that, first of all, this movie has been in development hell for a long time. Apparently it actually began production way back in 2009, and it was originally going to be a fully animated movie. That's kind of cool, but for whatever reason, it just kept getting pushed back and back and back, and then they finally made it kind of a live-action animation hybrid, and it finally got released this year, and in 2021, and of course, you know, partly due to COVID-19, it's getting a limited theatrical release, but it's also, you know, because it's Warner Brothers, it's probably going to HBO Max, so if you have that, you could probably see it. So, I'll try not to go into too many spoilers, though admittedly it's Tom and Jerry, there's not a lot to spoil. But my general feeling is, in many respects, it's kind of like Tom and Jerry in some of the other projects they've been in. When it focuses on Tom and Jerry, it's good. But when it focuses on other stuff, it's really not very good. And this movie kind of has the same problem that the original Tom and Jerry movie did have, and that the focus isn't really on Tom and Jerry. The focus is more on the human characters, which Tom and Jerry had human characters, but the focus was always about the cat and the mouse, and sometimes the humans were just, you know, victims of their shenanigans, so to speak. But, so the story of this movie is that Tom and Jerry, the movie starts without them knowing each other, which is fine. You know, the continuity of Tom and Jerry has never been airtight, so to speak, and Tom is, you know, just trying to make a living for himself as a piano-playing cat, and Jerry's just, you know, sort of trying to make a living for himself as whatever. He's just sort of trying to find a place to live. The two of them cross paths, and they get on each other's nerves, and they try and fight, which ultimately results in Jerry finding a place to live in a fancy hotel, and Tom is ultimately trying to get both into the hotel to live, but also get back at Jerry just because of basic cat and mouse things. So that's one part of the movie. And the other part of the movie is about this woman played by Chlöe Grace Moretz. I think that's how you pronounce her name. You've seen her in lots of stuff. Look her up. And she got fired from her most recent job, partly due to Tom. And so she goes to this hotel and she tricks a woman out of, and in a kind of a funny scene, she tricks a woman out of not applying for the job. And she gets a job as sort of an event coordinator right in the middle of this high-profile New York couple who are getting married at the hotel. And so she's charged with not only planning the event, more or less, but also getting rid of Jerry because they discovered Jerry is in the hotel, and of course he's going to be very bad for business if word of this ever got out. So in order to do that, she employs the use of Tom, and so she tries to get rid of Jerry, and Tom tries to get rid of Jerry, and from that point on, shenanigans ensue. And that's all I'll tell, and really from that point on, you can kind of figure out where a lot of this story is going to go. You know, which admittedly, I don't want to say is one of the problems, but kind of is one of the issues I have with this movie. The first main, I don't want to say it's an issue, but this movie kind of made me realize something, that it is definitely a decade too late. Again, this movie began production in 2009. If it came out maybe in 2013 at the latest, I think it could have been okay, but this made me realize that you don't really, at least not as commonly, you don't really see movies like this anymore. You know, the movie, or maybe you do, but, you know, it's like, you know, the Smurfs movie, or the Alvin and the Chipmunks movies, where it's these classic cartoon characters are put into New York City, usually it's New York City, and they just kind of pal around, so to speak, just adjusting the camera there we go. And they just sort of pal around, so to speak. But even taking that out of it, a lot of these cliches really haven't been done in that long a time. For example, I don't feel like I'm really giving anything away by this. You can kind of tell based on the setup. There's a lie revealed, you know, moment in the movie where about the last third, the lie that everyone has been telling finally gets revealed, and they mope and dope for about, not 20 minutes, but a good portion of the last third before they decide to, you know, mend their differences and, you know, go get them and finally finish the movie. And you really haven't seen a movie like that in a long time, and there's a reason for it. It's because people don't overly like these movies. Now, I know movies like the Smurfs and the Chipmunks and a lot of other movies like this, you know what I'm talking about, why they existed, but I think a lot of people have really gone past a lot of those cliches. There's other, especially with the advent of Marvel, so to speak, I know that's a weird example to go to, but people want more out of movies than just a lot of these basic cliches. They aren't enough to satisfy anymore. So whenever a movie like this comes out, you're constantly distracted by the fact that this movie feels so dated, but it's not kind of in a way that really, I guess in a way it does sort of encapsulate the time period. It's sort of like any decade, you know, from the 60s to today, how you look at it and you say, oh yeah, that's what the 60s were like, or that was like the 80s, the 90s, and so forth. These cliches definitely are a product of like the 2000s, and even before that, they were doing these cliches. So when you see a movie that brings them back, you're not really saying, oh, this reminds me of my childhood. You're just kind of like, oh God, we're at this again. But maybe you'll feel nostalgic for it. I don't know. It kind of bothered me. Now, with that said, this movie's getting a lot of hate. Like, it's really not getting, it's getting bad reviews. A lot of reviewers I've seen are not liking it. I don't think it's that bad. I personally don't think it's nearly as bad as a lot of people are making it out to be. I think it's honestly a perfectly okay movie. It's not really a good movie, but it's not a terrible movie. It just has a lot of these cliches that I haven't seen for a while. Didn't really want to see again, but excuse me, sorry about that. But it's back in this movie, so I'll just deal with it as it comes. Now, with that said, there are some other things that really do that are sort of timeless, annoying kids movie jokes. For example, there's a couple of fart and poop jokes, like this dog, you know, the couple who's getting married, for example, brings in a dog, and there's one scene where it's like, hi, can you take Spike out for a walk? He's had a lot of bean burritos, and this guy takes him out for a walk, and yeah, you kind of know where it goes from there. Mercifully, they don't show it. They don't show the leavings of the dog, so to say, but they do that. The music actually too is very much like that. A lot of the music is not just current music, but it's music that you definitely feel like a committee said, yeah, this is hip with the kids, and it's really lame. It opens with rapping pigeons. The movie opens with rapping pigeons. That's the kind of movie we're dealing with here. But with that said, this is a movie that very much you can split up into kind of two distinct halves. And again, the stuff when it's Tom and Jerry is really good. They're very well animated. They have a 2D look, but to me it's very clear they were still computer animated. They don't move quite like how 2D animated characters would. There's a lot of times where their mouths are just kind of stiff. They just don't quite have the same expressions you could really get out of 2D animation, in my opinion. And the stuff with the human characters is not bad, but it's really cliched. And yeah, actually at times it can get very annoying. And on top of that, it doesn't blend very well with the animation. Like, the animation is really, stylized and quick, and the humans can only go so fast to it. So a lot of times with the slapstick, you're kind of distracted at how slow it's being. And speaking of distracting, there's one thing this movie does, which I don't know if it's a spoiler, maybe it is, but all the animals in the movie are animated. And I don't mean like, they're made on computers and they try to have them look realistic. No, they look like 2D cartoons, which at first was really jarring. Like, there's a scene where, you see Tom and Jerry, that's one thing, but then you see like a horse that's like a cartoon in the background that's pulling a horse and pulling a carriage in Central Park, and I saw them like, the hell is that? Like, it was so weird. After a while, you get used to it. Like, a lot of the dogs are, animated. There's a couple elephants that are animated, and that's actually kind of cool. I thought that was actually a really nice touch that, to me, I don't want to say it reminded me of Roger Rabbit, but it definitely had that same vibe where it was kind of cool seeing all these cartoons interact with the real world. It just so happens the real world is kind of annoying. Like, the whole movie is trying to be... It's both trying to be kind of the real world that the cartoons interact with, but it's also trying to be like a cartoon world that the cartoons interact with. A lot of the actors, they don't go very over the top, but they do this kind of over the top performances that they are believable, but they also seem just a little off, and everyone is a little off in this movie. You have, Michael Peña, who, he's a good actor. He's been in lots of stuff, and in this, he does fine, but he also seems a little off. And the biggest offender to me is the main actress, Chlöe Moretz, who is trying her best, but you can tell in this movie that her comfort zone is drama, because there's some scenes in this movie where she has to give the heartfelt speech and the motivation, and there she does fine. But whenever she has to be really like kind of over the top and comedic with the expressions and the way she says stuff, you could tell she's very awkward and not in the zone that she's most comfortable with. So, well, I guess with that in mind, the best way I can describe this movie, at least from my personal experience, is everything with Tom and Jerry is good, and everything with the humans I tolerate. Now, some people may find this to be a really big waste of time, a really uninspired movie, and yet another example of a kid's movie that, honestly, we haven't actually seen that much, I'd say, in the past at least 5 years. But to some, they might just see it as one of those kids' movies that doesn't take kids very seriously. It treats them like morons. It's a movie where people got paid, but not much else. I personally saw it as an okay waste of time. If I had kids, I'd let them see it. I mean, I don't think... There's really nothing harmful in it. It's just Tom and Jerry doing their thing, and then they have to interact with a bunch of boring humans. So... yeah, that's really all I can say about it. There's not a ton more to say. I'd say maybe check it out for yourself, see what you think about it. But for me, it was a half-decent Tom and Jerry cartoon that constantly got interrupted by the uninteresting parts of Roger Rabbit, I guess. So, yeah, there it is. And I will get back to you in just a little bit with the second part of my double feature. Bye for now.